All right, it is 1:30 and I'd like to welcome everybody to the Preventing Amputations webinar. This webinar and really all of the classes I've done, many of the accounts, this is all developed and delivered because of the Susan Harwood grant that we are working with OSHA. So I'd like to thank them for this. This topic is one that's very, very important to me. And so we're trying to get the message out in any way, shape, or form that we can on how to prevent amputations. But we'll get into the controls first, since this is a webinar. You should have my screen's up a little bit. So we should have an orange arrow at the top, kind of in your upper right-hand corner, and that's called your grab tab. And that opens and closes your menu. There's a mute or an unmute button. I've had to mute everybody because we're getting a little bit of feedback. And so really the best way to talk, I guess, during this is going to be through the chat screen. And so you'll enter your message, decide who you want to send it to. You can send it to me, to the entire audience, to another attendee, and send it, and we can talk that way. But as with any of my trainings or webinars, if you have questions for me or specific areas that you want me to take a look at, my contact information will be at the end of this webinar. And on that, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Cole Craven, and I'm the Safety Director at TPM. And we work with 200 to 250 different businesses in the wood products industry. And so this presentation and this particular topic is very, very, I guess, near and important to me. And then I'm investigating a lot of these incidents. And so the ones we talk about today are only at the accounts that I've worked with, and it's only those accounts that have had me come in and investigate the incident, to try to figure out what's going on so we can prevent it from ever happening again. So today we're going to review some amputation incidents that we're seeing in our industry. We're going to identify those hazards, and we're going to talk about the importance of guards and the safety devices. And I think by talking about these incidents and explaining why they happen, we're going to understand the cause, so we know what to do to prevent these things from happening either again or at all, in your facilities, because we need to reverse the trend on this, as we are headed the wrong way. We're still having far too many of these, and oddly, it's increased during COVID. I think that people are distracted. They have other things on their minds, so we are seeing an increase there. So in talking about those amputations, obviously that bottom right-hand picture is a non-amputation, but I put that one on there because it's relatively recent, and that's from a skill saw, which we've seen oddly an increase of those recently of people losing fingers with skill saws. So we'll talk about the first one, and this is indicative of so many of these amputations. And this is, I can tell you right off the bat, there's a disproportionately high number of amputations due to planers. And this first incident, and we won't discuss everyone specifically, but this first one, it kind of holds true through all of my planer amputations. So they basically the exact same way. And how they went is we run the planer, we run it without guards on it, because they're going to come in and sharpen the heads while it's running. And that's relatively normal, because those planers are in a room that's supposed to protect everyone, from that planer. But the issue is we'll have jam ups or crashes, depending on what you want to call it. And we don't shut the machine down to clear out the jam up. What we've done is we'll take a piece of lath or a stick to keep the employee from getting into the dangerous parts, and they'll clean out that jam up. But what is happening real world at the end of those last couple of pieces, for some reason, the employees are reaching in with the hands to get that last little bit, or get that last piece. They'll try to flick it out of the way. And of the almost 30 amputations we're going to, look at today, half of them have been in planers. So if you're looking for a place to start, if after seeing this you think to yourself, holy moly, we need to do something about this, well, start with your planers. And so the vast majority of those have gone the exact same way. and that we culturally, we don't want to shut down that machine. We can't shut it down because you got to keep it running because the mill will shut down or production will shut down if we stop that machine. And you can see just in the first 4, 3 of those are in planers. And that injury number 3, there's a couple of really important things. Without getting into the location, this actually happened in a relatively large city. And it was a night crew member. There were 2 members on the cleaning crew on the, effectively the 3rd shift. And they would clean these 7 different buildings on the compound. A very long story short, we got the stacker was ancient. It was built in the 40s, but it worked well. We kept it. The off-feed conveyor from that stacker was also from the 40s, and it was a piece of junk. So we got a new one. And with the old off-feed conveyor, it was driven by a huge tooth wheel that ran on that stacker. And we took the chain off that. It wasn't driving anything. So that toothed wheel would spin when the stacker would run. And we didn't think that anybody was going to get, hurt by that. There was no chain. There was no pinch hazard. And one of the cleaning crew members was reaching through while that was running because they would run it and blow it down and clean everything. And it caught his coat. And it proceeded to catch his arm and slowly, spin it. And it ended up literally ripping his arm off. He had a twist amputation of his right arm. And he's far stronger, far tougher than I am. He actually extricated himself from that machine, called 911 to get him help, and then proceeded to sit against the wall and pass out. So here's the thing that we really do need to look at all of our locations. So he called 911, and it was 45 minutes before he actually had medical attention. The paramedics were there in 10 minutes. They had less than 10 minutes. But there were 7 buildings on this compound and only 1 other person there. These guys did not work together in pairs. And so they found the first guy and they said, where's the guy that got his arm ripped off? And his response was, what are you talking about? And they went through searching building by building by building till eventually they found this guy. Now he made it. He lived, thank God. But had that been a laceration amputation, had it cut his arm off, he would have very likely bled to death. So it's a really good idea that if knock on wood, God forbid you have the bad thing happen, whether it be an amputation or serious injury or heart attack, we need to have a method for getting that medical help to our person as quickly as humanly possible. And so if we've got the luxury of additional people, put them to work, have them, stand somewhere safely, but where they can guide the ambulance or the fire department to where we need them. So we're not playing that help for the person who's injured. Number 5, this was a millwright, and he does something that I'm a very big believer in, is he fixed a machine and he wanted to watch it run. So he's going to watch it run for 5 to 10 minutes and make sure what he did worked. And while he was watching, he leaned his hand against a hydraulic ram on another machine, and it cycled and caught his right index finger and took it off. And people had for quite some time walked by that ram, and even myself included, walked by, and we didn't, I'd only ever seen it extended out. I'd never seen it drawn fully in. But when it draws fully in, it absolutely is an amputation hazard. And we probably, in fact, if not likely, have some of those hiding around. And so that's one of the attachments on your grab tab. You should have a tab that's called materials. I've got a machine guarding on it attached there. So please take a look at that. I highly recommend it. In fact, if you want me to do it and you're a TPM member, I would be thrilled to come out and do a machine guarding on it. So that is attached. So you can take a look and go through your facility and see what are those kind of hidden hazards that we never realized we had. We probably all got some. Number 6, and we'll talk a little bit, but this is one of the very few injuries that happened to a brand new person. And what they had done, once again, a planer, that they had put in a bar that theoretically would keep your arm out, so you could just reach your arm in, but you could never get it far enough to keep you from reaching the blades. And you know, and that works, I suppose, well when everybody's 6 foot or lower, but when you have a higher kid who's 6'7", his arm's a bit longer. So he reached in there to clean out the jam up, how he was taught to do it, and it pulled his arm in. It broke his arm, and he had some lacerations, and it took the tip off of a finger. But that's how we taught him to do it. He was completely unaware that there was even blades in there. And so I have some concerns about some tribal knowledge things and things we just have always done it that way because that's how we were taught. And we're going to want to look at those and say, okay, is this the right way, or is just this the way we've been doing it for a long time? We're seeing an increase in amputations due to chain conveyors. And with this, I mean, the chain conveyors are in and of themselves pretty innocuous. They're pretty safe as long as the gears are guarded. But what we've seen in multiple cases, when employees stick a finger in there to clean out a piece of wood or try to grab something, it's taking fingers and it's taking thumbs because it's getting their fingers stuck in there and taking them down the conveyor until they go around the socket or the gear, and we're losing fingers. And in this one, it didn't initially amputate his finger. It broke it in more than 30 places. The X-ray, it didn't look like even a finger anymore. It looked like a sock with gravel in it, and they told him they were going to have to take the finger. He refused. And then about a month later, they ended up having to take the finger anyways. But it would have never been, it would have never worked. But we've got to make sure employees understand they can't be sticking their fingers into these chain conveyors. You know, they're very slow moving. Seems like they're not hazardous. Once we start sticking fingers in there, we got troubles. I have had, especially lately, an increase of people cutting fingers off with skill saws. And what's going on with this is they'll be holding the board and they're making that last cut, or they're making that little cleanup cut. And so they don't do it at the table where they're supposed to, or they're supposed to. They're just going to just clip, get it off real quick, and they end up taking generally their index and pointer finger on their left hand. And 9 is not a amputation. Obviously, this is what happens when an employee reenacts a scene from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's not an amputation, but this is the only injury we're going to see on this whole thing where the employee was horsing around, or they were messing around. And so it could have been significantly worse, but I do put that on there so you understand early on that really, other than this one, none of these are because the employees were just screwing around or messing around. 10, it's kind of similar to a planer, and the employee's walking by the molder, and it's just basically a planer has blades, above and below, whereas a molder has blades on the sides. And this molder, we ran it unguarded, and it was in its own little molder room that nobody was supposed to ever go into unless it was shut down and locked out. Except for we still had employees cutting through there because it was quicker to get to the break room. And he's walking by, molder's running. As it always was, he trips, and as he's tripping, he sticks his hands out, sticks out one of them into the molder itself. And it takes the tips of 3 of his fingers and it sliced the top off of his hand. And 11 is very similar as well. It's a molder again, cleaning out a jam up. So already we've had quite a few amputations from employees clearing out jam ups. And this 12 is an interesting one in that it is a millwright with significant experience, 25 years plus, working in a dust collection system. This is a fairly good sized dust collection system, and it has gates that come down and break up the large chunks of sawdust. And he thought that he was nowhere near in deep enough into this machine to have to worry about those gates. As he was working, the gates came down and it took up all 4 of his fingers behind the knuckles. And the hand was pulled into the dust collection system, so it was not found in time to even attempt to reattach it. With 25 years of experience. 13, started with an amputation. We had a chain conveyor, a large chain conveyor feeding the hog. This is a pulping mill, and they got clogged up with bark and sawdust and ice and just crud. And he was told to shut it off, lock it out, and clear out the jam up, and then start it back up. He thought it was, we thought he was trying to be quicker, he was trying to be more efficient, so he left it running and started kicking it because he felt like he could kick it loose. And he did. He kicked the conveyor loose, but it also caught the heel of his boot, and it pulled him into and around the drum of that conveyor. He had to be surgically removed. He was pulled in up into and slightly past his pelvis. He had to be life flighted and have additional surgeries. And unfortunately, we lost him a couple days later. The injury was just too severe. 14 is another chain conveyor where he stuck his thumb in. He was trying to get a piece of debris out from underneath that chain. So he put his thumb in to kind of lift it up, pulled it out with his left hand, and then his thumb got stuck in there, and it pulled him along until he couldn't follow along with it anymore, and it took his thumb off at the second knuckle. Number 15. This person has 2 amputations on here. We'll talk about him on his second one here in a few more pages. They occurred almost, it was 1 year and 1 day apart. But he lost all 4 fingers of his hand, either cleaning up ice and debris out from underneath, exterior conveyors. And this company had a tool that was built for this. You would attach it to your skid steer or your bobcat, and it was called the stinger, and you'd put it in underneath the ice and the debris, break it up, and break it up, and then you could take that stinger off, just get your bucket and go clean it up. And so they didn't want anybody in the way of the conveyor in between the machine or anything. And these employees felt that they could do it more quickly if they just left the bucket on there and they just muscled the debris into the ice chunks and into the bucket. So he had his hand on the bucket to get some leverage to pull the big chunks of ice in. The operator knurled or tilted it back and caught the employee's hand between the bucket and the frame of the conveyor. This is another one where the procedure was to put that stinger on and do that. And the employees felt they could do it more quickly. We're gonna touch on that here in a little bit when we talk about the trend analysis. 16, an employee amputated 2 fingers with a table saw. Table saw did not have any guards of any type on it. They weren't using any sort of spacer or stick to keep their hands out of the way. So we had issues with the machine, how it was set up, and also procedurally, we just did it that way frequently. 17, the employee went over to a machine. They were not trained, authorized. We didn't want them anywhere near it. For some reason, tried to adjust it. They'd never been trained. Their job was actually very simple, and they shouldn't have left the area. But once again, they went over to go try to help out. Caught the tip of his thumb in the machine. Never informed the employer of the incident. Ran out of the building. The supervisor saw the employee running out, saw the glove on the ground, and when they picked up the glove, the guy's thumb fell out, and they grabbed the thumb, put it in a Ziploc bag, and in this town there was only one place where he could go to the hospital to take a look at, and we ultimately gave it to the doctor there. The employee refused that it was their thumb, and unfortunately they could not be reattached due to the amount of time that passed. And there's a lot more going on with this story, but it's not really applicable to what we're talking about at this point. 18, an employee lose 2 fingers on their hand using that skill saw, which is terrifying to me that thing was ever in use, but that is no longer in existence now. This one is an interesting one, and those are nippers. Those are pictures of nippers there, and they're making cedar shingles. And they'll bring that nipper down to the foot control, and it'll basically just like push through and slice that board down and make a shingle. And we regularly, in doing that, we'll have a log fall, piece of wood fall as we're waiting to nip it, or it's up there, and then this practice is just to let it go. In fact, there's a little chute that catches it and feeds it into a conveyor so it comes back up to us. The employee had that log fall. When they reached for it to grab it, they didn't want it falling back behind, and when they did, they put their foot on that switch and ended up cutting off tips to their fingers with the nipper, and we caught it in between the log they were trying to save and the nipper. This is the second one of an employee grabbing a chain conveyor, putting there and trying to pick it up to clean out debris, and they also had their thumb taken off as well. Now 21, this is my second incident with the same employee. He was still working for the company, and he was wanting to go above and beyond. So he saw a work order. He's not a millwright, was never asked to be, was not trained to be, that there was a loose chain, and he thought that was something that he could handle. So he goes in to the running, and it's just on a motor to drive a conveyor. And it was a scheduled thing. As chains run, they get loose, and it technically wasn't due to be done for about another 3 to 6 months. But he wanted to go in and see if it was loose, and because he thought he could do that one and impress his employer. So he reaches in while the chain's running to try to check the tension to see if it was in fact loose. It caught his glove and pulled his hand in, and he lost the tip of his left index middle finger. We had an employee lose their right index finger. They were putting an attachment on a backhoe, and they were cleaning out the hole where the pin goes. As the backhoe shifted, it ended up taking their index finger, basically got amputated between the contact of the backhoe and the new attachment. We had an employee lose a right index finger while rolling a 30-foot giant I-beam, trying to flip it over themselves, and it came down on their index finger, and then they lost it. Was supposed to wait for actually machinery and additional employees, but they thought that they could get it done quicker. Another table saw, this one was relatively recent. Once again, it's no guard on it, and they're running the board through and just not using their spacers or not using the guide. And we're back to planers again, cleaning out that jam up, and they lose the tips of their index, pointer finger, and ring finger. And then 26, we had an employee get 2 fingers caught in beach. So we had a belt conveyor, and it snagged their glove and pulled their index and their middle finger in and around the drum, and they lost the tips of those 2 fingers. This employer here, once again, skill saw, making that final little cut. Just gonna get that last little piece, do it real quick. Lost the tip of their thumb. And then 28, the finger lost 2 fingers again, cleaning out that jam up the last little bit. Just thought he could swipe his hand through and knock that chunk out of the planer. Ended up losing his pinky, the tips of his pinky, and his ring finger on his right hand. And so this will be the last of the incidents that we discuss. But I do want to let you know that there are even more than this. This is just with my accounts, the ones that have asked me to come in and investigate it and find out, why this happened, so you could come up with a way to make it never happen again. This is not just, cross nationwide. This is a very small sample size, and this is what we're seeing. And this is over the last couple of years. So this is in my mind, a relatively short period of time, but this most recent one is an interesting one in that we had an employee lose the tips of 2 fingers on their left hand on an edger. And we were going to shut it down. We had a scheduled head change, basically blade change, what you're going to do with that. And the employee took the guard off. Well, he shut the machine down. So he turned it off because he knew he was going to do the head change, pulled the guard off, continued to do some other work around it. And while he was working, he turned his hand and it came into contact with that head that was still spinning. Now, it wasn't a severe, it wasn't a, thankfully he just lost the tips of just the 2. They didn't. If it had been spinning faster, we probably would have lost quite a bit more. But this one's interesting in that we've got to take a look at our lockout tagout procedures, and we'll talk more about those here in a bit to make sure they actually are protecting the employees. That we need to, for something like that, we need to shut it down. We need to lock it out and make sure it's stopped before we even take the guard off. So I did a trend analysis on this, because if I can figure out, why these are happening, or kind of, where and why they're happening, I can hopefully teach people how to prevent it. And the first thing that really, really stuck out to me is the vast majority. There's only a couple incidents on here that were not veteran employees. 10 plus years of experience, more than 10 years on average. So it's not the new guys getting hurt, it's our veterans. By and large, statistically, the vast majority is it's our veteran employees. And there's a really disproportionate amount of injuries and severe incidents involving planers. So if we're thinking about starting somewhere, that's where we need to do it. And in every single one of these, the employees knew they were in danger. They knew they shouldn't be doing that. If you're working on something, and we need to teach our employees this, if they're doing something and they're thinking, I don't know if this is a good idea, they need to stop. Because with all of these, where I interviewed the employees, they all said the same thing or a version of it. Oh, I've done it that way 1,000 times. And then there's a lot of cases here where a supervisor or manager would walk by things being done unsafely and didn't bring it up, didn't enforce it, didn't say anything, and that can't happen. With most of these, almost all of them, they had lockout tagout procedures in place. They were known, but they weren't followed. So it's not, this one sticks out to me too. The employees weren't doing it because they didn't care. They weren't cutting the corners because they didn't care, or they thought it was quicker. They were trying to save time. They were trying to be more productive. And so this is my opinion, I suppose, but these incidents are coming from a good place, if you will. We can use that motivation, but we've got to make sure we make our employees understand that it's more productive for us, for them to do it the right way. It's better for them, it's better for us. We have to support that doing it the right way is what we want. Because what happens is we get it's normalization and deviance where we do the wrong thing for so long, that becomes our new normal. That's our new starting point. Like I think of that one where they taught the kid to reach his hand into the planer to clear out the jam up. There's so many things wrong about that. But when they had done it and they got away with it getting hurt, well, then it almost in your mind becomes, well, it's never going to hurt me. So we get that confirmation bias. And so we end up moving further and further away from the right way of doing it. And so we do need to take a long and hard look at how we're doing it. And is it the right way? Is it the safe way? And it may seem like a simple thing, but I think about this a lot. With these amputations, it's almost always their dominant hand. And that may not seem like much, but I think about everything that these people are going to have to relearn to do, whether it's button a shirt, zip something up right. When you're missing fingers on your dominant hand, this changes their life. Any amputation does, but this changes their life in such a significant negative way. So we've heard all the horror stories now, and we don't want that to happen. So how do we prevent those similar incidents? How do we prevent that from happening to us? Well, we got to recognize that we likely, almost certainly, have some bad habits. So we got to retrain. We got to look at our procedures. Are they efficient? Are they going to do the job we want? Do they effectively keep our employees safe? So we're going to have to retrain on those. I think we've got to be on the work floor. Our culture is whatever it is at the moment. It's, how we do things. And if we got a good culture, then we'll stop each other from doing something that's going to get them hurt. If we've got a bad culture, well, then we'll walk by it. And so our culture has to be one where we're going to stop each other. We're going to care about each other and keep each other safe. All of us have got stories. Share those stories in your training and talking to people. If you see somebody reaching a hand in a running machine and you stop them, tell them a story about what happened to somebody who done that before, or done that, or a previous employee. We just can't walk by anything anymore. And look at your machines, conduct audits on that machine guarding. There's also in the attachments and the materials, there's a lockout tagout procedure. I'm a huge believer in putting the actual picture of where you lock out on those machine specific procedures, but we've got to make sure that it's unacceptable to remove a guard before that machine's locked out and stopped. And we have to make sure that they understand that that's the only way. So what do we need to know? Well, the different type of amputation hazards that we've got with machines, the different guarding requirements and guarding types. It's far more than just a expanded metal box over something. Safe work practices. So we do, by and large, a pretty good job guarding the point of operation, the point where the work is done. At the saw itself, or at the drill, or where it's being punched or sheared. We do a pretty good job of that. And we recognize the hazard there. So, and like I said before, it doesn't have to be a box around anything, but we've got to prevent any access to the point of operation. But we've also got to prevent access to the mechanical motion and the stuff that's driving the point of operation or bringing the materials to that point of operation. We need to guard the conveyor that's bringing the logs to be cut by the saw. And so we've got to guard those reciprocating, those transverse motions. So there's a lot of things we need to guard against, a lot of moving parts, no pun intended, that we have to look at. And that's where you tend to find a lot of your nip points that are unforeseen, because we are good at looking at the point of operation. We're not so good as protecting the mechanical motion. And so there's going to be opportunities when you go out there and take a look at your machinery. And when talking about machine guarding, it's got to prevent contact between the employee and the machine itself or the product. It's got to be secure to the machinery. It's got to protect falling and flying objects. This is a picture of one of my accounts, and that guard's not doing the best job of keeping logs from coming through. But it can't create any new additional hazards either. And so it's got to allow for safe lubrication and maintenance and can't cause any interference with production. So we've got those requirements in there, but we tend to be kind of locked in that we have to put a box around that hazard. And it doesn't have to be just that. You can have guards that are fixed, and absolutely, you can have them that are interlocked, that you pull one of those guards and it shuts the whole thing down. I'm a big fan of those. You can have ones that are self-adjusting. They move as the machine and the product moves. But the thing we have to for sure get is distance. We've got to prevent any access, and not just suggest it. We've got to prevent it. Whether we've got gates or we room something off to where that door opens. I would highly recommend putting a switch on that door that if we go into the room where the unsafe machine is, it shuts that machine off. And if we're putting chains up, well, then you need to have signs up, you need to have procedures, you need to have training on what that is. But we can do other things as well. We can put up light curtains. If you have to have that machine that's unguarded, if you will, then make it a two-hand control. So you kind of pin that employee in that one spot. So they literally can't get their hand into where the work's taking place because they have to have their hands on both controls. You could have pressure plates. I've even seen restraint devices that go on the employee's wrists that they can push the material up to a point, and then those restraint devices, those leashes, keep them from getting in far enough. So we can get creative. It doesn't have to just be, and that's the hurdle sometimes, is that we get stuck in that mindset that there has to be a metal box built around it. We've got a lot of other things that we can do, and we just keep in our minds that we've got to prevent that access to where the work's taking place, or where the injury or where the equipment could hurt our employees. And lockout tagout is probably the biggest, we'll say the second biggest. The guarding and preventing that access is probably the biggest, but lockout tagout's right up there. And they've got to understand, we only take guards off for maintenance or repair. And then we got to lock that machine out and have it shut down, completely shut down and deep and powered down before we remove a guard. And there's no excuse. I don't see any, I've never heard an excuse yet on why it would be acceptable to clear out a jam up while that machine's running. And we need to de-energize it. So that's shut it down, locking it out, waiting for parts to quit moving, like with that edger, before we do anything, before we're changing those tools or dialing it. So that's got to be part of our lockout tagout procedure, because we're trying to prevent that release of hazardous energy. And it's more than just electricity, although we do a pretty good job saying that. You know, there's mechanical energy, there's hydraulics. So you got liquids under pressure we may have to worry about, or pneumatic, air under pressure. You may have chemical energy or thermal energy that something's hot because it's been running. You've got kinetic energy or something that's suspended, whether it's suspended, you know, up in the air and it's gravity, or it's suspended because it's a spring under pressure. So you've got all these energy things, all these energy sources we've got to prevent that release. And so we can prevent that release through a bunch of different things, but you need to do them all. Well, not all of them, but you need to do more than one, where you've got to have lockout, tag out, and you got to have guarding, and we've got to have good work practices. And there may be instances where just distance is all we can do, and that's acceptable. You know, we keep people 7 feet away from that hazard, and make it to where they can't just, you know, purposefully or accidentally get in there. And if we've got a job that is that hazardous, maybe we need to look at automation. But this is this, I think about this a lot. Ultimately, with all of this, it's going to come down to the employee's choice. And we need to let them know, you know, what our culture is, what we want from them, what we need from them, what is, you know, best for everybody, or the right way of doing it. But it's going to come down to their choice. And so we're going to go out, we're going to identify those machine hazards. I hope everyone understands the function of those machine guards and safety devices. I think it's a really good idea to identify who's authorized to remove guards. And employees should feel very comfortable to report missing, damaged, or inadequate guards. I've lost track how many times I've gone into a place and there's a guard that was taken off that, you know, months ago, that was only supposed to be taken off for just a bit because we were going to change this and put it back on, and it sat there for a year and a half. And everyone needs to understand the risks of circumventing those guards. So, you know, inspect the machines before you use them. You know, employees need to know and need to follow, and so do managers, follow the machine safety rules and machine-related safety rules. But if the bad thing does happen, we need to do a real accident investigation. And we're going to look at what really caused this. So if you want to prevent it from ever happening again, we've got to really dig down and get an honest cause of why this happened. And these are just some of them. It's not going to be all of these, but it's likely going to be multiple. You know, was the management of the cause? Was the person doing the job? You know, was the person involved? Was it the material in and of itself? Was it just inherently dangerous? Is it bad machine design? Is our way of doing it is bad? You know, where is the cause? Because the goal is, we don't want this to ever happen again. And it never has been, not once in my career has the cause been that, and once again, in my opinion, that the employee just needs to pay more attention. There's always multiple things at play. You know, whether it's our management of it, the person doing the job, the material in, you know, while they're doing the job, the machine that does it, or the way we've trained them to do it or taught them to do it. There's always multiple causes in there, and it never is just the employee needs to pay more attention. So with all these amputations and serious injuries, yeah, we've had many OSHA and labor and industry audits. And that's the other side of OSHA. This presentation, this training is brought to you by the consultative side. And they're trying to prevent amputations through things like this. Well, and then you've got the compliance side. And they're going to try to prevent amputations, you know, with their method. And if they've come in because you had an amputation, you've really invited them in. So I don't like to paint them as the boogeyman. They're there because we invited them in. If they're coming in post-incident, you may see them come in because of employee complaint, and maybe the history is so bad that they just come and see you every year. But there is enhanced enforcement on this amputation prevention and on combustible dust. So maybe for one of those reasons. But in addition to the emphasis program on amputations, there's many things that they look at. If you were to get audited, I'm seeing a lot of citations for non-compliance on your machine guarding, and most of them on lockout tagout. Do you have procedures, machine-specific procedures? Do employees have training? Are the employees following the training? Is the employer enforcing that? And then are you reviewing it annually to make sure that people are still doing it the way that's going to keep them safe? And is the program sufficient to keep them safe? And so those are just some of the items that you'll see, but it all comes down to the employees have a right to a safe and healthy workplace. They do. And they've got other rights underneath the Occupational Safety and Health Act. They have the right to ask OSHA to come in and inspect their workplace. And they have the right to receive information and training about hazards, how to prevent harm when the OSHA standard is applicable. They have a right to see the results if we have testing done. And they have a right to look at their medical records, but they have rights underneath the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And employers have a lot of responsibilities. But it comes down to you have a responsibility to provide a safe workplace. This is a summary of all of them. I'm not going to read all of them out, but I do want to let you know that if you do have the bad thing happen, you have a fatality or you have a hospitalization of 3 or more employees, you got to call OSHA within 8 hours. You have to call them and let them know. If you have an amputation or a hospitalization of a single employee, you need to call them within 24 hours. You got to call them and let them know. And you're going to absolutely get a visit. Because we basically invited them, we've invited them in. And then your state may have, if you're in Washington or Oregon, it's a little bit different. So if you have questions on that, give me a call. We can discuss those specifically. But in federal OSHA's statutes, you've got to call and let them know when you've had either fatality or hospitalization of 3 or more people within 8 hours, and amputation or hospitalization of 2 or fewer employees within 24. And employees have a right to file a complaint. It is absolutely anonymous. They are taken very seriously, and they're going to keep that information. They're going to keep that information confidential. You don't have a right to know who it is. And in fact, I would strongly counsel, if you get an anonymous complaint, let it go. Don't even bother thinking about who it may have been. It's not worth it. You're going to distract yourself from fixing what the problem is. Because if they're complaining about something, then we got an issue we need to fix. And it's not going to help one bit by trying to play Clue and figure out who called and ratted us out. And besides, even if you found out, you can't. The Whistleblower Protection Act keeps you from being able to do anything to that employee anyways, because it all goes back to that employee has a right to a healthy workplace, safe and healthy workplace. So on those attachments, this is normally, I apologize, this is a little different than how I do most of these. Most of these is in a classroom session, but COVID's made that very, very difficult. So in your attachments in that materials tab, you've got a test, just kind of test your knowledge. And so it can help us find where there's holes in this presentation and what we need to change on it. Letitia or I will contact you and we'll go over that. There's a course evaluation that if you'd be willing to fill out, that would be fantastic. And you can scan and email it to me or to Letitia or mail it or call me and tell me to come pick it up. There is a machine guarding audit, and it's a really high level one. But if you're a TPM member and you do that and you want me to come in and do a machine guarding audit, I'm happy to do that. If you're not a member, the people that may see this webinar a year from now, I won't, but if you are a member, I'm happy to come and do it. And then there's also just a lockout, tag out, machine specific lockout, tag out format, if you will. So we can write those machine specific procedures and put in pictures of where we're supposed to lock out and what it looks like, so we can show employees what right looks like, what safe looks like. And then we can hang those and post them on machines and train employees. But I do really want to thank everybody for attending this. This is something very important to me. It's something that I've seen so much of over the last couple of years. And, you know, before the COVID thing hit, we were kind of heading the right direction, but I am worried people are really distracted. They're worried. And so, you know, walk around, talk to your employees, see how they're doing, and remind them of the way we do it. Yeah, Frank, I will absolutely get that to you, but that's it. I want to thank everybody. If you do need a copy of anything, if you can email me, and then I'll respond with the attachments that you want. But thank you for coming, guys. That's going to do it. And be safe out there.